Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Careers Sitrep, the regular slot where we talk about service leavers, transition and great sectors into employment. So welcome and happy Friday, 22nd of April. My goodness, where's the year going? So lots have been going on since our last Careers Sitrep. As you know, lots of events have been happening. Coming out of COVID, as we know that what happened in COVID, a lot of the sectors in the UK in terms of employers really suffered, but quite a few did very well. One of these is the renewables sector, which has continued to grow at a quite extraordinary pace, offering fantastic opportunities for many veterans and service leavers who are looking to work in industry, etc. So great opportunities. I have to say, with what's going on in Ukraine, the whole focus on energy is a real major focus right now. So again, which just makes this particularly delighted. This is a very important session we're going to have today on a really interesting, relatively new sector, which I know many people will have real big conversations and questions about. So that's what we're going to cover over the next just under an hour or so. We're going out live on YouTube, Facebook and LinkedIn. So welcome to many of our guests from over previous sessions, and we want to focus. Now, lots to cover. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to be doing this on my own. I couldn't do it on my own. We've got a fabulous set of guests to join me today with you for this afternoon. So first, I'd like to give a fantastic warm welcome to James Cameron. Welcome, James. James, I know really well. I think 17 years in the Royal Tank Regiment for being CEO, Chief Executive of Mission Motorsport, and now Mission Renewables, this new thing. I'm sure James will be talking a lot about that. So welcome, James. Great to see you. Also got Marcus Peters. Welcome, Marcus. Head of Offshore Health and Safety at Offshore Global, Offshore HSE Global, and Renewable, and also Culture in the Contractor and Engagement in also in Renewables. But before that, 10 years in the Royal Navy, Submariner, diesel submarines, as well as SBN. So huge amount of experience. Marcus, who joins us today from sunny Boston, and it does look sunny out there as well. And then Rich Jones. National Veterans of Manager at RFEA, Forced Employment Charity. Welcome, Rich. Great to see you. Ex-Army, Royal Regiment of Fusiliers. I think about 24 years in that, I think, Rich. And really look forward to what you've got to say. And last, but by no means least, is Rob Wilhoit, UK Area Manager at Global Wind Service. Before that, I think 10 years in REMI. So a fabulous group with a lot of expertise, which I'm really keen and looking forward to hearing all your views, etc. So I think perhaps the first thing was we sort of start this sort of chat. It's very, very relaxed. Just going to talk about our own. We're all served, all gone through transition, all had different experiences. So just want to quickly have our before we go into sort of top tips and stuff. Just for anyone listening, so what's our own experience? So James, how was it for you? You know, your own transition. Did you find it easy? What were the challenges? What do you think? And you're on mute, I think.
Well, I did well there, didn't I? So finding my way into civilian life, starting by finding the mute button. Yeah, no, I think there's a bit of me that's still sort of going through transition. It's it can be quite daunting, I think, when you come out, because it's not just about your job; it's about a whole load of other things, and they all simultaneously happen all at the same time. And I don't think the military, across the three services, does a wonderful job sometimes of preparing us for what it means to be a civilian. The MOD focuses on the stuff that's relevant to the MOD when you're serving, and so you're insulated from the rest of the world that people out there sort of live and make their way in. And so it can be quite intimidating, I think, when you suddenly sort of find yourself dropped into that cohort. So I've got a fair bit of empathy, I think, with those who've gone through transition. And I joked at the beginning and said I don't think I've really gone through it. Of course, I now work in a service charity sector, doing lots alongside those leaving the forces. And I think in a way that sort of helpfully kind of insulated me a little bit, and it's given me some of the culture and the things which otherwise I think I'd really miss. So it's a hell of a thing to go through. Is that jump from one thing to another? But it's a cultural change as much as the change.
That's an interesting thing you say, James, about the cultural things, and I know it's a theme I'm sure we'll develop on this one about what people are used to when we serve, and then the difference in, frankly, civilian company. Marcus, how was your experience? You had good whack of time in the submarine service. Did you find that gave you good experience or so? How did you find your own transition?
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, it was a sort of an interesting experience because I signed for 22. I didn't choose to leave. I was medically unfit for subs because due to an accident. They offered me, oh, well, you can go back to the surface fleet, which was interesting because I'd spent 7 days on a ship in my life, and then 10 years chasing ships around the North Atlantic and doing all that fun stuff. So it was a bit of an interesting time, and I chose to leave and really struggled. I mean, resettlement at the time was, very unceremonious. I remember going to the UPO and having my ID card cut up in front of me, and here's a piece of paper, walk out, clunk the gate shut, and that's you a civilian. And, there weren't the plethora of charities and networks and social media that can help, back in 97. And for many years, I sort of ran away from the military environment and saw it probably a bit bitter and twisted, to be honest. But then, 10 years ago, I started getting involved in networking with some people and helping them with a service, and then realizing what MOD are trying to do with their, Leave Well sort of initiative. And, for the last couple of years, really been trying to help service leavers get somewhere with their careers. And I'm super excited to be involved in Mission Renewables with James and with the guys here. And yeah, I think looking at it now, it's interesting to see how resettlement has changed. And I'm going full circle because my son joined the Royal Marines 8 weeks ago, and he's 8 weeks into basic training. So I'm now a father of somebody who's in basic training, which is a bit strange, But, yeah.
Excellent.
Goes full circle.
Well done, Marcus. Well, thanks for that. I mean, there's so many, again, great themes which we can develop in that. It's interesting you talk about, the greater number of support groups, functions, charities, etc., out there compared to, say, perhaps the time when many of us actually left. But yeah, Rich, how was it for you?
I share similar experiences, really. When you decide to leave, I could have stayed on for a few years longer, but I decided to make that change due to my personal situation. But one of the things that really sticks out in my mind is the fact of having to reinvent myself. Spending the best part of a quarter of a century being a infantryman, latterly a senior NCO. So that taken away, and you are just pretty much Joe Bloggs when you go back to the streets and talking to people, and all the colloquial language that you do get in the workplace and the industry language, getting used to that, and remembering that you can't use military terminology to people because they just don't understand. You feel a little bit of alienation, really, but one thing that does stick out for me as well is what someone said to me, and they said it's just a period of time. Transition will make you vulnerable at stages, but it's just a period of time, and you will fit back into civilian life. And actually, I do stand by that, and I do repeat that to a lot of people, because there are some people that find the transition difficult. I did myself. I was very proud when I left. I thought I knew it all, and it was a bit of a culture shock when I got back to civilian life. So, it is a period of time. It doesn't last forever, and you will find that you'll quickly assimilate back into civilian life.
It's interesting what you say, Rich, and in fact, as well as Marcus and James, that there are times when it can be a challenge. But I mean, crikey, as you all show from what you're doing now, you're all in great jobs and already now. And I think their practice is a theme. Sometimes can be a bit daunting, but there's a lot of support mechanisms and a lot of stuff and good advice out there, hopefully, which we'll come on to in a bit more detail later on. But no, very, very interesting. And Rob, and how long ago did you transition, Rob? You're in the REME, I know, but
yeah, so it was around 7 years ago now that I left the forces after serving for about 10 years. And to be quite honest with you, it's a similar sort of theme to the rest of the gentlemen on the call. Is at the time, I don't think even then there was a huge amount of opportunity or organisations to sort of support, apart from your typical CTP workshops, to support that sort of transition out to the forces. So it's kind of left on the individual really to sort of make that leap or make that step. But for me, it kind of goes back to realistically the reasons why I wanted to leave the forces, and I think at that period of time as well, I think I can probably hone it in on 3 key areas really. That the military was going in a bit of a different direction, with the changes to pension schemes, changes to, redundancies through, the reduction in size of the armed forces. And also at the time, I felt like I kind of achieved what I wanted to out of the forces. I'd done various, brigade level exercises in, Europe, in Africa, in North America, operational tour in Afghanistan, and then all the various niceties of, adventurous training and things like that at the Remy Ski Lodge in Bavaria. And for me, I'd sort of, really felt that I achieved what I wanted to do. And I also wanted to take, maybe get a bit of sense of ownership of my career from that moment forward. So, so at that point, I decided to embark, after only, just under 10 years of a military career, in a life outside the military. And fortunately, it's worked out okay thus far. But it's also super good to see now that there's lots of organisations and schemes there to support people transitioning out of the forces.
That's really interesting, Rob. I mean, and I think it's true. In the end, it's an incredibly personal thing, the reasons why anybody decides to leave. Sometimes it is literally the end of the whole time. Others do go slightly earlier for a number of reasons. And we always talk, sometimes there are points when people are under more pressure. There might be family pressure or career, good, logical times to go and time to take on new things. But in the end, everyone is different in that respect. I think, and let's say for me, I did 33 years in the Royal Navy and had a brilliant time. The first 23 years of that was all seafaring stuff. The last 10 years more in headquarters stuff. But I loved it. But actually, and I did leave 5 years before I probably needed to. But I just wanted to get out and start something new in industry and learn that stuff, etc. But it's interesting what you say about it being the right time. And I'm sure many people watching, who are still serving, may have this thing. And I think there are many messages. People shouldn't be encouraged to leave early necessarily, but some people will want to get out. And one other thing I would say is that we've noticed during the COVID time, a lot of people stayed in because of perception of the economy, which is true. Now it's changing. Now it's a job seekers market right now. So the numbers are going to be interesting. That's very interesting. We're seeing that everywhere, Alistair. There's such competition for quality candidates at the moment, not just in renewables, across every aspect of industry. So the one thing that's interesting is for those who, however you make your decision to leave, whether that's a sort of you're coming to the end of your time reason, or you've elected to go early, or even but leaving early has been forced upon you, there is a point though where you have to start putting yourself first. And service leavers, it's a generalization, but that's not something that they do well. Regardless of how they've got to that decision, you see people in their final week of work who are still, to use a Royal Armour Corps example, their regimental James guy who's the bloke who works the system, who's still entering data on behalf of his regiment. That whole business of service that we all sort of join to do, because you don't really do it for the money, it really does run through people. But it also tends to disadvantage them at the point where they need to start thinking in terms of putting themselves first. It's always one of our big messages, but I think it's something that kind of really bears repeating.
I think the other thing, James, is, the one thing that I wish somebody had said to me is, are you sure about that decision? Because, and I was at a Remy Careers event a couple of weeks ago at Catterick, and I had this young guy come to me. He joined, the Army Air Corps straight out of college. He'd done 4 or 5 years on Apaches. Super, young guy, really enthusiastic. And he was like, "Yeah, I'm thinking of leaving." And I sort of spent the next half an hour sort of saying, "Are you sure?" And at the end of it, he was like, "Well, actually, I'm not. If I'm really honest, I'm not." Well, then don't. Stay, because actually that might be the best thing for you. There's great opportunities out here, but you've got to really, know that you're making the right decision, because otherwise that'll eat you up for years afterwards. And I think, I meet a number of people that are in that space.
I think it's such a key point, Marcus. I agree totally. People leaving at the right time for them, and it's what could be the right time for somebody might be different from others. And I do think, and exactly, and if other people are watching, either in this thing or, there's the thing about good resettlement, having a very good service, and which is which is out there, sort of thing, it is important, but it must never be construed that that's going to ensure loads of people want to leave all the time, because I think part of it has got to be to show there are times you say, well, actually, right now, stay in for a couple more years, get another qualification, perhaps be promoted again, and then you'll be in a better position. But we'll come back. I think we'll come back, and obviously to the theme of this particular sector as well. I mean, it's as we're sort of thinking a bit about this more general thing. I mean, what sort of attributes of service leavers do we think? You know, I mean, you've all now come out in being successful in. What are industries? What are the great things, attributes that veterans and service leavers bring? Do you think that enhance their companies? James, what do you think of that?
So, I mean, something that we found a long time ago is that those who've served tend to be given to assist those who are also going through transition. And we're all evidence of it on here. You know, we're all giving some of our time, effort, our professional bearing towards helping the journeys of others. And that doesn't necessarily benefit us individually, but we all hopefully feel like that we've got something to add in order to be able to support others who've come through that same process.
Yeah.
Now, that got brought home to us in a really big company, really, you know, some time ago for us, you know, sort of 7 or 8 years ago, where we asked them, how many veterans do you employ? And they didn't know the answer. So we asked an audience of people who'd volunteered for doing, actually, funnily enough, you know, given that, you know, we're recording this on the last day of Invictus Games in The Hague, you know, when we came to the end of the very first Invictus Games in 2014, we asked a population of people who were drawn from one of those big sponsor companies, how many of you have served, and how many of you would give of some of your time in order to be able to support others on a similar journey? And the deafening response that we had was 100% yes. They were all interested at being able to support in some way others that have come before them. And that's the thing. I think you don't really see that. When you're serving, your peers are all serving. You don't have a social group necessarily of those who've stepped outside the military, or if you do, it might be just a couple of people. There is an entire community of veterans out there who are only too keen to help people like Marcus, who just want to give you that critical piece of advice that they wish they'd had when they were at that sort of critical time. And to tap into that can be absolutely phenomenal, because it can just help you make good decisions, frankly, about your own journey, without potentially needing to go and make all of those mistakes yourself in the first person.
Yeah, no, it's a very it's a good point. I mean, I suppose, do we think that, you know, people when we served were people aware of what the skills that employers would? Rob, what do you think about that? So when you were serving, did you think that, you know, what the attributes which would make you a great person in global windsurf, do you think you were aware of that?
I think now, you know, I think there's much more focus on, you know, people transitioning out of the military and veterans alike, and organisations are aware of it because they've seen people successfully transition out of the military, you know, and offer maybe something a little bit more in some situations. I'm not saying in all situations that's apparent, but, you know, I think when you're leaving the forces, you've got such a hugely diverse set of skills, you know, and that's from the various, you know, geographical locations that you work in, the roles that you have within the military, you know, for me, that's something that needs to be championed, you know, and you should also champion that yourself through that sort of transitionary phase. So I think back there, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago when I left, I don't think there was a huge understanding of people transitioning out of the military. But I think now there are so many more organisations that, you know, have schemes associated to bring in specifically ex-military and veterans into their organisations, and that's just through the fruits of the labour of people that have gone before them, I would say, you know, that have gone in and transitioned well into civilian roles and progressed on from there. Sure.
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, Marcus, do you think the same thing? I mean, in terms of, do you think employers now have a better idea than, say, 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think they do. I think that, I mean, there is still this language translation element that service leavers need to speak the language of the employer. And that's a fair bit of what I do, is translate what somebody has done into what they could do, so that I can send them to Rob or and Rob goes, oh yeah, so you want to be a wind tech, or you want to be procurement, or whatever, because they just don't see it the same language. And the problem is, a lot of what we do in service, it's just what we do. And then when you start to peel that back, actually, I was talking to a guy recently, and he's like, well, here's my CV, and it was pretty poor. So we started to build upon it and ask questions. And it's like, what about organizational skills? I hadn't thought of that. And you start to, talk through it. And from the minute we walk through basic training, you organize yourself, you organize others, you prepare for a plan A, plan B, plan C. And if you're in operations, you've got 27 plans, and then you'll always use 28 anyway. And, that adaptability aspect and organizational of self and others, those are key skills in civilian world. And when you start to put that into the right language, employers see that. Because, how many of us went on a training course because you were told to go on it? I mean, I went on a radiological monitoring course at the Institute of Naval Medicine. I had no idea why I was going on it, and there was no expectation I was going to fail on it. And I went, I did it, I passed, I got a certificate. Never used it again, but I've got it. But that isn't the civilian way, You bring those strengths of adaptability and resilience to change. We all have that. We just don't recognize it.
Yeah.
So you have to get people to really self-reflect and use the right terminology.
No, that's brilliant, actually. And in fact, thank you. And Zoe, great to see you. Thank you. It makes a very good point. There is still some work to be done understanding how skills translate. I mean, I think it's probably fair to say that employers probably are in a better position. Many of them do know more, but there is still an awful lot more work to be done. And I think that's where in the States, I think there is some skills mapping for qualifications in the armed forces, not the formal stuff, but related to roles, whether you're an infantry or or whatever, or a technician or so, and which then relate to things. That hasn't really yet been done in a big way in the UK. So I think there is definitely still work to be done, as Zoe says. No, very interesting. Rich, what's your sense in terms of the overall skills which perhaps we take for granted, and how much they are useful for civilian employers?
I think they're vital. I think one of the challenges, especially when I left 10 years ago, was the fact that there was this barrier and the glass barrier that companies put in place where there was no industry experience. You may have the skills, but you don't have the experience. What's great to see now is that we've got companies that are saying, right, okay, we appreciate you've not got this specific sector experience, but actually you're bringing across transferable skills that we can utilize in this role. And I think that's really important that we overcome that barrier and actually give people access, veterans access and service leavers access to these roles that sometimes will be denied them because they just don't have that specific background in those types of roles. But I think also as well, something of veterans and service leavers' character is bravery and courage, and actually how they address tasks. But a lot of people are shied away when they're faced with a difficult task. But we know from our military service, it's actually right. Okay, adapt, overcome, see if we can get it fixed, and we actually do fulfill the task. And it's very much task driven sometimes. And you'll see that service leavers and veterans, they don't just stop when the clock hits 5 o'clock. They'll get the job done. And you can't buy that in civilian life. That is a quality that service leavers bring across.
Yeah, totally.
Sports afternoons and early knockoffs on Fridays don't quite.
Sports make amends.
But yeah, absolutely. But you're dead right. It's the way in which military people approach tasks is fundamentally different to how their civilian counterparts tend to do it, and you don't really realise that until you spend a bit of time in both worlds.
Yeah.
And there's almost a bit of a culture shock that people kind of go through. Even, they might have found the job of their dreams and they've stepped across into it, after a seamless transition and all of the other bits have gone well. But they land in a job and you almost feel like you're surrounded by aliens because some of the language is different and some of the motivation for people around you. It's there, but it looks quite different, and the way in which you engender it and harness it and deal with it and also deal with setbacks just feels very, very different to what you might have come from. And that's okay. And once you realize that everybody else is kind of making it up themselves as they're going along, and you're not the first person to have kind of gone through these things, it really kind of takes the edge off. But that sort of shock of capture in the first instance, yeah, absolutely. I think we can all identify with that to some degree.
Yeah, no, totally. Absolutely. And Sarah, a great point from Sarah Chadwick. Thank you very much. Spent a lot of time translating CVs for service leavers. So, I mean, it is this issue. I mean, we've all gone through this. And when you're serving, you don't really know what the things which are going to be attractive. And there is a real theme. And I think we all need to reflect on it and do all we can. And obviously, lots of teams are engaged in that. Yeah, it's a key. There is. I remember actually it was going back a couple of years, thinking. I mean, we all know some people have more technical skills. Let's say they're quite, let's say, air engineers or nuclear submariners, Marcus, for example. So, which can be specifically used going to nuclear engine industry or whatever it is. But those are, in some ways are easy to understand. But the ones which are more difficult are the ones which are more generic. And we've talked about team skills, resilience. But I remember. I think, in fact, it was General Richard Nugent when he was the CDP. It was the Invictus Games a couple of years back, and he said the training piece and leadership and management. We all talk about training, but it wasn't just about the fact we've done training courses. It means that you're available. We're used to being trained again, and you're trainable, and you're also used to training others. And these are some of the things which, again, in companies aren't used to that. And the leadership management piece isn't senior leaders, senior managers, is everybody. I mean, the really young junior infantry soldiers very quickly are managing small groups in their platoon or whatever. That's imbued from an early stage. And quite often when you go into a company, you find people in their mid-30s, the first time they're managing more than one person. But so Robbie's coming with a point here. Found that civilians often find it to be just us due to work. Yeah, and there is an interesting thing about how quickly the pace of you can't just be too, to try and sort of take charge too much and be too military in a civilian environment. There's a time for people to adjust to it. Very, very interesting, actually.
I think, Alistair, one point as well that I find with a lot of people is in the military, we're very literal and we follow things to the point. So if you want to pass promotion within any of the services, you must meet this criteria. And if you don't meet this criteria, you don't get to be promoted. The civilian world's not like that. So I find that people say, well, I didn't apply for that job because I don't have all the qualifications. Yeah. And, as one of the HR managers said at a session that we were at recently, he said, you need to think about a job advert is a bit like a dating website. It's the utopian partner that you're looking for. You never get that utopian partner, but you might get 75% of it. That's what a job advert really is. Yeah. And I think, the problem is a lot of the people go, oh, it's listed 17 qualifications and a degree, and I don't have a degree, and I only have 15 of those qualifications. I won't apply. Yeah. You have to change your mindset because that's not how the civilian world works. Yeah.
I'd just like to point out this isn't how Marcus and I met.
No, that's true.
You sure? Yeah, no joke. No, very good. And Zoe's come back. Zoe from the Royal Marines Charity. It's great to see you. It's always be part if you sign the armed forces, come and take time to learn as an employer how skills translate. It's a really key point in this. And as I say, I think thanks, Zoe. I think there is progress has been made, but I think this is now reflected in government and the Office of Veteran Affairs. People know that employers need to be given a better narrative to help them. And I think they are improving, but my goodness me, there's still work to be done, isn't there? Yes. So they're great. These great. Thank you so much for these comments coming in. Please do chuck them in, whether you're coming through on LinkedIn or on Facebook. It's great to see you. And any questions you want us to tackle in particular, that'd be great.
I think it's interesting from the service leaver's perspective. You're looking at this thinking, okay, crikey, I need to develop different language to express myself better. I need to have more confidence in some of the things that I go for because I've looked down a list of criteria and gone, Christ, I haven't got 6 months experience offshore, therefore I can't go and approach an offshore role. Starting to have the confidence to be able to put yourself forward for things like that. But there is stuff which is coming the other way to meet you. And it's exactly the kind of things that Alistair's just been alluding to and that Zoe was asking about, where we're getting companies to sign the Armed Forces Covenant. We're getting them to do a number of things which include adapting their own language and adapting the way in which they handle service candidates to be able to reflect the fact that you having served, and indeed for that matter, your spouse and the family that you've dragged around with you, have not had a typical life experience that other applicants for the job might have. And the covenant is all about leveling that playing field in order to remove the disadvantages which you might experience. And that might be because, you know, your wife hasn't had one continuous career because she's been pulled around various postings after you, or husband, vice versa. And it is also the fact that your qualifications might not be the same qualifications that you would be expecting. Probably, you know, you might not have a degree, you might not have the same sorts of stuff that you would have done had you come through a sort of civilian route. Companies need to move on this too. And increasingly, we're getting them to, actually. And, you know, I think Marcus representing RWE, you know, is at the front end in one of these sectors of companies that are leaning into looking at, hang on, how do we get people of these quality in where they don't look like the ones which our tools particularly help us to find. So there's a bit that's being done to help you that's coming kind of the other way. And it's a bloody good place to start. Go looking for companies that like people like you. And if you start there and work your way outwards, you're at least starting by tilting things in your own favour.
It's a great point, James, and it's a great time to actually come into more focusing a bit on the sector, on renewables. In fact, just before we do, I mean, I think there's an interesting point. The training and all the investment that the country has placed in the armed forces and military people who serve, you don't think it's sad if that's put to waste. So harness that and use it to good of wider society and certainly employers. I mean, it's all these great things which people have done, but. Let's turn perhaps our thoughts now a bit about the sector, renewables. A lot of people will be listening, watching, not really understanding too much. So, Marcus, perhaps give your view in broad terms of the sector, the opportunities. We all know probably that we know it's growing hugely. It's grown enormously in the last 5-10 years. We know that renewables are taking up to 46% of the country's energy now, and that's forecast to increase. What's your overview?
Yeah, I mean, you know, renewable. I've been in renewables since 2008 when it wasn't quite sexy to be in renewables, and you know had derogatory comments by the oil and gas and coal community. But we've seen it grow, and you know that there are sort of two layers to the renewable sector. You have the major renewables where you're looking at megawatts and gigawatts of generation. That tends to sit in the onshore and offshore wind sectors and solar PV. And then you've got the micro generation, which tends to be, smaller scale, looking at things like district heating schemes, air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, geothermal, that type of thing. So, but beyond that, you've then got all of the supply chain tiers and all of the service companies that service the assets, the people, and you've got the plethora of roles that go with it. And one of the things that frustrates me slightly is that the headlines always say, talk about sort of offshore, onshore wind, and from a technical point of view. So people are immediately, I must be an offshore technician or an onshore wind technician. That's where the work is. When actually, we've got a huge range of roles throughout the supply chain tiers, from logistics to procurement to legal to support services and everything in between. And that's the key thing. It's how do we make people aware of all the other stuff? Yes, we do need technicians. Yes, we need a lot of technical roles, but it's not just technical roles. And that's where, we are really struggling generally. And then we've got about 500 roles this year just in the UK. We've got about 1,500 worldwide. And if, from an RWE perspective, we've got roles, everything from Japan all the way through APAC, Taiwan, Korea, India. And I'm currently in the US where we've got a massive recruitment game going on. So, it is a very buoyant sector indeed.
It's a really interesting point. If it's, obviously clear it is growing and things, but as I say, it's not just what people might think it is. It's all these plethora of other roles as well. And Rob, is that your sense on the sector in terms of the wider roles in it? I mean, what's your sense on it?
Well, I think the industry's grown exponentially, in the last, 10 years or so. And if we're looking at the recent announcement from the government of, increasing our renewable energy capacity to, I think, something like 50 gigawatts by 2030, and then by that point, 95% of our, power generation is going to be through renewable sources. So, just showing you where we've come in the last 10 years and also what's then forecasted for the next 8 years, and that's the UK alone. And then if we look at the wider global market, like Marcus was saying, Asia Pacific, another huge market. The US offshore wind market off the east coast of the US is going to be another, a huge market entry there that's, commencing early next year, another circa 40 gigawatts going in there. And what that does is that just provides a huge amount of opportunity for people, not just the British forces, but also forces around the globe as well. And again, similar to what Marcus was saying, Global Wind Service has got a footprint across 12 business units globally. And within that, we're tapping into local content because some of the customer-facing contracts that we're working up against, really hone in on local content rulings. And then closer to home, we have ScotWind and all of the floating wind projects that are coming online in the future as well. And there's also some key focus around, the workforce development piece on that. So, it genuinely is an exciting industry to be a part of now and into the future. And I still think we're still at the relatively early stages of it, which is super exciting to be a part of.
So, Rob, think about that. I mean, that's very interesting. And let's say the wind element of it, as opposed to the other bit, solar and stuff. So on the wind bit, I mean, obviously, I know it's offshore and there's onshore, but I mean, going back to Marcus's point about these other roles are linked to, well, they can be, if it's the offshore stuff, it's also the shipping, there's taking stuff, there's building stuff out at sea. So there's on maritime piece. Same on the land side. There's obviously engineering, all of that. Do you see both of those things in terms of the wider roles available?
Yeah, I mean, there's a plethora of positions, across, varying streams within the industry. To be quite honest, typically, blue collar, white collar. If we're looking wind specific, that's the part of the industry that I'm sort of working in. We have a huge and vast amount of varied blue collar roles, wind turbine technicians, and there's, I don't think we've got enough time today to deep dive into every single one of those types of roles. And again, from what Marcus said, from the white collar perspective as well, you have operations roles, commercial based roles, senior management, procurement. There is such a diverse opportunity of positions within the industry, and it's about, one piece of advice I would probably give to people, looking into this industry now is, really research the various levels that we have and the various opportunities that are presented within the industry, because there is so much opportunity out there.
Absolutely. And I think that, the thing that people have to recognize is that certainly for offshore wind, as an example, as you know, Rob, 3 to 5 years in development for a 3 to 4 year build. And actually at the front end of that development, the vast amount of the roles are, going to be sort of planning, procurement, consenting, environmental focus, all of those sort of focus areas, which are very, very key to making sure that we get the permits we need and the authorization to carry out then construction. And the tiers that we use within the industry are massive. The tiers, whether that be the main EPC contractors or all of the support contractors that support those. So it's a huge amount of roles out there. Yeah,
and then once these wind farms are operational as well, we're now seeing 20, 30 year service agreements, and that obviously is going to take a large team of not only blue collar technicians out completing the service and maintenance activities, but of course white collar back office management that are there to support and plan throughout the sort of life cycle of that wind farm. So it really is an industry for the future and a job for life for all of us in our era, I think.
I think one of the comments was around, retrofitting, and one of the things that will come over the horizon very quickly as well is when you start to look at the early UK projects that are coming to end of life, there will be a decommissioning and repowering industry almost, because you look across Europe, we have assets that are coming up to 20-year lifespans, and developers like ourselves will now start to decommission those sites, put new turbines in, or in some cases, if the permit isn't extended, they will be put back as they were, and we'll move on to new projects. So there'll be a whole industry just in that within probably the next 5 to 10 years as well.
And is that, Marcus, the link into a point just made earlier on retrofitting and link into construction? Or is that a...
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming that they mean sort of major component exchange and sort of that type of thing. And, that in itself is an industry, a micro industry within its own right. And there are different ways of that service being provided. Companies like ourselves, we have our own major components teams that go from site to site doing this. But we also still use service contractors to do that at times. But, even within that sort of element, if you look at something like a service operations vessel, I was talking to a Navy chef recently, and he was saying, well, I don't think there's any scope for me to be in the renewable sector. And I said, well, we need chefs on SOVs. If you want to stay in the catering element, yes, I can put you in touch with somebody. And he went, really? I didn't know that. And that's, I think, the key message. People don't know what they don't know. We have to get them engaged.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a great one from Zoe again to James about LCAS, learning credits, early enhanced learning credits. James, is it aware of that? Have they picked up on the qualifications in the sector?
Yeah, we're making progress. So for those kind of listening in, enhanced learning credits, that bit which the government pays towards everybody's resettlement. If you've served for a short period of time, you only get a finite amount of it. But if you've served, I think it's 9 years or longer, or if you're leaving, as Marcus did, under sort of medical reasons, then you'll get your full gamut of enhanced learning credits, which you can draw down through a system for up to 10 years after you've been serving. It hasn't been possible to use those for one of the key sort of gateway qualifications, particularly for those who are going to work offshore in offshore wind. Now, there's a caveat to all of this, and Marcus and Rob have already sort of pointed out that there are loads of jobs in offshore wind, many of which are not offshore. There are a huge number of functions in order to kind of make all of this stuff happen. But one of the things that you must do to go and work in the offshore wind industry is to have your global wind organisation passport, which not only allows you to go and work offshore, it's your basic safety accreditation. Offshore, not just off the coast of this country, but it's a global qualification. There is work going on at the moment with MOD in order to make that GWO course potentially something against which you can draw down against your enhanced learning credits. But already we've got training providers who are starting to put together solutions that add together your GWO course with some key elements of employability stuff that you may well need. And it might be a useful point for me to talk about trends at this point. We've established renewables are getting bigger where other things are threatened or getting smaller or having to change. And that's been driven and then accelerated by that nice Mr. Putin that's given the government all of the excuse that it needs to bring on shore and to control as much of the UK's future power requirements for our own domestic security. Now, what that means is that you generate your power by different ways, and clearly you're seeing offshore wind as one of those big projects that's able to deliver a large quantity of that. But it's also the way in which you distribute it and how you use it. And how we live will become much more about the flow of energy around from the built environment, i.e. the homes that you live in and the buildings in which you work, how you move around the place, mobility solutions that we probably used to call cars and things like that, through to the appliances on which you use in order to be able to use that power. And one of the themes that runs through it all is electrification. So whether it's a deep geothermal thing that you may be working on, whether you're working in the construction industry on zero carbon placemaking for the sort of new generation houses, you'll be putting in charging for electric cars. You will be fitting solar onto these things. There will be heat and power solutions that will need plugging together, figuring out and made to work on a grand scale. And of course, National Grid, our own national mechanism for moving power around, is suddenly being asked to do some very different things in terms of the power requirements for electricity, where it comes from, how it's stored and where it goes. Now, for those who are slightly longer in the tooth or will remember leaving the military a little while ago, British Telecom had a huge program as they moved through a program called OpenReach, which was rolling out our domestic broadband infrastructure. And that represented an incredible opportunity, not for anybody who'd ever been to Blandford and served in the Royal Signals, but for a huge range of service leavers and veterans who found that their low-level skills, whether they'd been a sniper in the infantry or a Royal Logistic Corps driver or serving in the Royal Air Force in various roles or in the Royal Navy, actually equipped them perfectly to be able to do a quick skills top-up and then contribute towards this national effort. We're looking down the barrel at doing the same thing again, but in the way in which we move power around the country. and much more about this movement of energy. So it's generated greenly, and then it's used in the most sustainable way. And this green revolution is what the government is talking about, that the Department for BEIS, for Business and Energy, is such an important lead at the moment, because it's changing and it's shaping the way that we'll live in the future. So when Rob's talking about jobs for generations, and Marcus is talking about the length of some of these offshore wind projects, these absolutely are jobs which are emerging that are not a flash in the pan.
Yeah.
It may be that the construction for delivering certain bits of it moves as that goes, but these are careers for people for life, and they're specializations that will serve people incredibly well throughout the rest of their lives after the military.
No, that's great, actually. And Rachel's asked a thing, and I know there's a comment earlier on about apprentices. So actually, apprenticeships, I mean, I know in the past people haven't talked too much about it. Now it's very much a key thing. Are there great opportunities for apprentices in this? Marcus, what's your thoughts on that?
Certainly in the wind industry, there is.
Yeah.
And, it was news to me last year when I was talking to the apprentices that are coming through, and we actually had a couple of people, not service leavers, but we had people in their early 30s who were doing apprenticeships. Now, that was, quite interesting to behold, but we have a huge number of apprentices across a whole range of sort of technical apprenticeships, but also we've even got some legal apprenticeships now, which again is an interesting way of getting a law degree. But yeah, they do exist, and a lot of the large companies are now looking more and more into them. And also, the other thing is that we found out recently when we were at the Mission Renewables event in Silverstone that MOD are offering internships for up to 6 months, which I think isn't widely known, but that is something I think that service leavers should look into, because that's a perfect opportunity for organisations like ourselves to say, well, we'll take somebody for 3 to 6 months, and it's a try before you buy. And even if there isn't anything at the end of it, that person's got 3 to 6 months good experience with the CV. So
absolutely, or has decided that actually going back into the military is the right thing for them to do right now. Back to the point.
Yeah,
that's really good. In fact, and I just want to come on to top tips in a second, but before I do, just Rich, what's your? I mean, having what you listening to all the stuff about the sector, do you think it's a sector which people going back to military, whatever service, whatever specialisation people served in, what are they? What makes ex-forces folk particularly good in this sector, do you think?
I think it's the I think it's the willing to work and willing to train. Something that ex-forces and veterans have done throughout their military careers, and getting access to those courses, I think is vital. And it's good to see that actually we're raising awareness of the sector, and one of the most important sectors that we're going to have for the next generation. And we've got the service leavers there. We've got the people that are looking for roles, technical roles, that is going to carry on into a career. And it just seems like quite a good fit for myself.
No, completely. I mean, there's so many obvious things, isn't it? Okay, so I had covered lots of points, lots of good sort of things we've plucked out already. But if somebody's listening, what would we think if we'd say our top sort of couple of top tips each for people leaving, either more generally or considering this sector? Rob, I want to start with you. So, what would be your top tips for somebody?
I think. When I transitioned out of the forces, somebody gave me a very, very good top tip throughout that process, which was 3 words, and it's all the same word: network, network, network. And that really in this industry, helped me out, quite well. But also off the back of that, it's also have a backup plan. And I think that forms, a very good foundation for you when you're transitioning out of the forces. That you have to research and look into the industries that you want to go into, but you also need to have a backup plan, because you get given, depending on when you are leaving the forces, if it's the end of a full career, 22, 24 years, or whether you're leaving mid-career, if you say, you still have that 12-month period where you have to run through a resettlement program, and it all pivots on that very last couple of months where you need to try and find employment. And actually that's that can be squeaky bum time, I think, and that is and that's a bit of a worrying situation for people. So ensuring that you've, pre-planned your resettlement period and network throughout, should stand you in much better stead. So that was definitely one of the top tips that helped me when I was sort of transitioning out. And the second one would be research. Research the industry and the varied roles that you want to go into, and this works hand in hand with the networking piece. Really just get hold of people that are working in the industry, and especially ex-military folk. I really advocate, speaking to people that are transitioning out of the forces or wanting to come into the renewable sector now, because people helped me when I did exactly the same. So it's just giving back a little bit. So for me, I think those are the sort of two real key areas or top tips that I would suggest for people wanting to get into the sector.
Rob, that's excellent. Very, very useful, I'm sure, for everyone. Rich, what about you?
For myself, I think be prepared for change. And the transition just means change, and be prepared for it. And our natural instinct is to fear change, when actually if you're ready for it, if you're aware of it, then you deal with it a lot better, and you can actually navigate your path a lot easier. I think some people get overawed, and I was one of those, get overawed by the huge difference in civilian life and military life. And sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees. But actually, if you have a structured plan that you want to go with, and have a backup plan as well, but it just ensures and it just supports that transition from the military into civilian life, and also change when you've actually reached civilian life. Most of us have done best part of a decade in the military. In civilian life, you can move jobs 3 or 4 times in that time. That doesn't mean that you're a failure. It just means that perhaps it wasn't the right fit for you, or perhaps you may be getting more money elsewhere. So, there is a change post leaving the military as well. So it's not about fearing it. It's about navigating it and understanding that it is going to happen and having the awareness. And I think the other one is never stop training. I've been given opportunities. I'm using my last batch of LCAS at the moment. I'm doing a master's in strategic management. I don't know how, sometimes being an ex-infantryman, but I'm training myself up. I want to continue training, because you don't know where opportunities are. And actually having those qualifications behind you, and having in civilian life, when you have transitioned or going through the transition, you're getting industry experience as well. And it puts you in a better place when you do apply for further roles.
Excellent. No, some very good tips there. Yeah, and the thing about change and being ready to embrace change is a key thing, isn't it? Yeah, Marcus, what's your top tips?
I think picking up like Rob said, I mean, there is no excuse in the modern world now. You're never alone. With LinkedIn and social media, and you've still got sort of fat man down the pub that you might know, or go pop down the British Legion, and there's so many avenues. Use the charities like RMA and RNA and whatever it might be. Go and talk to people, and then take it to the next level, where read the role profiles of the jobs that you're interested in. Look at the language that they use. Look at what is expected from the role profile. Because if you don't match the language in the role profile to your CV, chances are you're not even going to get an interview. So it's really look at that. And for me, it's not about how quick you get to the top of the mountain. It is that journey to the summit, what you learn along the way. Because I think a lot of people think, well, I cut my ID card, I walk through the gate, and then I'm going to be a senior manager within 12 months. It doesn't work that way. You have the aspiration to be it, and you can do that, but it's about how you get to there. That's the key thing. Get your strategy sorted.
Very useful. Very, very good indeed. James.
I leapt in there early, didn't I, with my start putting yourself first and start getting out there. Responsibility for getting all of this right just lies with yourself. And that's really scary until you realise that there's lots of people out there who are keen on helping you. But they're also not psychic. So help them. Get out there. Go network. Ask questions. Visit places. If you can get yourself onto a placement with the business alongside the people who are doing the job, it's such an incredible insight just into, frankly, what makes civvies tick, which will be really useful and important to you. So just lean into it. It's your journey, and then you find yourself a bit further down the line, hopefully being able to reflect on how you can help other people come along behind you, because we're very much in the business of supporting those who are coming along behind and not pulling the ladder up to be able to make it more difficult for those after. It's the other way around. Let's help people leave well.
Exactly.
A really key point.
I think it's crucial that, you know, anybody leaving the forces now, you know, really makes the most of that resettlement period. You know, there are people, organizations, schemes, as I've said, you know, earlier in this forum, you know, there is opportunities for support, and there's ex-military people in the civilian world already that are more than willing to support that. But it is fundamental that you have a plan throughout that period. And like James said earlier, you know, you don't want to be getting to the back end of that 12-month period and, you know, not completed any resettlement courses, not completed, you know, anything that's going to increase your ability to secure employment once you hand that ID card and you walk out the gates for that final time. So it's imperative that you really structure your resettlement period. Attend, you know, career events, you know, like James's team, you know, developed a few weeks back, the Mission Renewables event at Silverstone. Fantastic platform for people to come and just have some conversations, and it increases your knowledge, understanding of the industry, civilians, the way they tick, speak, etc. And at these events as well, you know, typically the people stood on those stands are ex-military people, so you know they can also provide not only industry knowledge but also some support through their own experiences. So it's a relatively short space of time, but you can pack so much into that last 12 months.
That's a very good point.
And one other thing, Alistair, I think is, you know, asking for help is not a sign of weakness, and I think we have to overcome that. And you know, I'll give a shout out to Zoe and the Royal Marines Association, who have been, you know, amazing with my son, you know, since the day he's joined. You know, the RMA are talking to the recruits in basic training. They're there for those that are due to leave. You know, if they get injured, they're based at Lympstone now. The charity sector is not what it was when I left. You know, but you've still got to go and talk to these people. You've got to ask for that help, and it isn't a sign of weakness. You can never be alone in this game now. The networks are there for us, you know, if we need it.
Marcus, it's a very good point. I mean, I agree. You know, obviously we're in the charity sector. I mean, many charities do deal with more, you could say, more vulnerable veterans. That's a really important thing. But there's a lot, you know, and there's, like you mentioned, Royal Marines Charity. I mean, RFEA deal with people who just need a bit of support from time to time in their lives into a job, which is really important. And actually, when you go back to the wider, you know, and create the CTP, vast majority of people come out of the armed forces, get a job, and they never need any extra support. But there are quite a few from time to time, and perhaps everyone gets there at certain stages, do need a bit of an extra height. If I was, I mean, these are brilliant top tips. So hopefully, if our service leavers are actually watching, I know there's some brilliant comments, and thank you very much for all of those. But do sort of take heed of them. I mean, I would just add to that list just two things. One is have confidence in your backgrounds, confidence in the experiences that you've got and the training and everything. So when coming to an interview, without being overbearing or whatever, but just because many people just do think, I'll never get it, I haven't got the experience. Just remember there's some fantastic whole life skills which you've got, which can put you into great confidence. And the second thing I would say is this: look at the pathway. This is an amazing pathway. James's initiative here and Mission Renewables is a wonderful way of even, you know, looking into this sector, which may absolutely be 100% for you. If it's not, well, you'll find out. But it's because when people leave, they don't really know much about other sectors. This is a wonderful way to understand this sector, which is growing. But my goodness me, some great top tips there, which I think you've set out very well. So I'm just conscious of the time, actually, but I think this is a really, really very valuable session, actually. Very hugely grateful for all the panel's inputs, etc., and hugely grateful for all the comments which have been coming through steadily through the thing and the questions. I mean, I would say, my goodness me, this is a sector which has, Marcus's point from say 10 years ago, was reasonably in its early days, was quite small, not necessarily highly thought of. Over the last 10 years, has continued to grow steadily. That projection is clearly going to continue at a time when other sectors may well start to reduce, and we've already seen that in some sectors. So wow, so the overall sector is growing, but it's not just about what people have thought about, you know, what were the main jobs. Think about what some of the people have said on the session today. There's loads of different roles, some which people probably weren't aware. So do look on the various websites, which hopefully have been going up. And there's an awful lot of opportunity, whether it's more high-end engineering-y, full-on construction-y type skills, to cyber, to project management, logistics issues, and all of that sort of stuff. There's a whole raft of things which hopefully will suit people's interest. Yeah, James, did you?
And I think in terms of practical stuff that we can do, for those who haven't heard of Mission Renewable, there's no particular reason why you would have done. It's all very new, but it's a sector initiative designed to be able to help us do skills transfer from the armed forces into the new green sector jobs that are emerging. So it's for us to kind of help pull some of this stuff together. So for those who are going through the CTP process, there is a sector guide which exists on the CTP portal. We're in the process of refreshing that because so much is changing. It's changing so quickly with the support of Renewable UK and a load of voices from industry, some of whom you might recognise because they're on this screen, just helping us to bring that to life a little bit. So a new sector guide coming out to renewables. And if you're interested in networking, well, take people's word for it. You will find both Marcus and Rob are on LinkedIn. There is specifically a veterans in the offshore wind industry group, and we can make sure that the link for that group is well done. And where they're reaching out to you and saying, please, please, please network, there you go. There's your opportunities.
Excellent. No, cheers, James. Absolutely. And that networking thing is a key thing. Do the preparation, network like crazy, and be flexible and be confident, and think about those other points which you said. So, wow, I think that just about concludes the session. Really useful. I think it covered a large area in a sector which still a lot of people don't completely understand. But I think after today, hopefully they'll have a lot more points to go for. So thank you very much indeed. Thanks to our panel or our team, our guests, etc. Thank you for everyone who's been listening over the last hour, and certainly for those who are offering comments. This will carry on, so the conversation will carry on the various on the social media lines there, etc. So do keep the conversations going, and we'll continue to react, etc. and do that. But until next time, thank you very much indeed. The next one, watch out for what the subject area will be, and it'll be another interesting one, and just look out for that. But anyway, it's been a pleasure this afternoon. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, everybody.